The freeze frame is unforgettable. Marjorie Taylor Greene leans forward, her face flushed, her voice slicing through the chamber like a jagged blade. Her words are sharp, loud, designed to dominate. And across from her sits Jasmine Crockett, still unshaken, almost statuesque. In that instant, the contrast is staggering. Rage colliding with resolve, volume battling dignity. The entire room seems to hold its breath, caught between chaos and composure. What happens when the storm meets the stone? When a politician who thrives on fury crashes into a woman who has mastered calm? That is the question hanging over this clash. A question that would not only silence the chamber but ripple far beyond its walls. Greene doesn't let up. Each shout is sharper, more frantic than the last, as though sheer volume could substitute for reason. Yet Crockett doesn't flinch. She doesn't raise her voice, doesn't roll her eyes, doesn't let even a trace of anger escape her lips. Instead, her silence speaks louder than the yelling across from her. It is the silence of strategy. The silence of someone who knows that patience is power. The audience, both in the room and those who would later watch in disbelief, feel the tension coil tighter and tighter. Every syllable Greene hurls only deepens the contrast. One figure unraveling, desperate to control the narrative through intimidation. The other sitting steady, embodying the unshakable truth that dignity doesn't need to shout. And then the hook strikes. This clash wasn't just about words. It wasn't just another spat in the endless noise of politics. It became a defining moment, a stage where two identities collided, one built on chaos, the other forged in composure. In that crucible, the question wasn't simply who would win the argument, but who would own the moment, who would embody the very idea of leadership in America's most contentious hour. The chamber, the viewers, the nation, everyone knew something historic was unfolding. But as Greene's voice hit its peak, and Crockett's calm sharpened like steel waiting to strike, one thought echoed louder than any shout. This showdown was far from over. But how did the room reach this boiling point? The cameras were everywhere, angled high, angled low, capturing every grimace, every flicker of composure, every word that would soon echo across America. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was theater, a national stage where reputations could be built or broken in a matter of seconds. The walls hummed with anticipation, and the nation watched, knowing that once again, politics was about to deliver a moment bigger than the arguments themselves. At one end sat Marjorie Taylor Greene, leaning into her well-worn role. For her, outrage was not an accident, it was a tactic. Every raised eyebrow, every shouted word was crafted to dominate headlines, to make the clip go viral, to ensure that her fury became the story. She fed off chaos like oxygen, reveling in the spectacle of disruption. To Greene, politics was performance, and the louder she became, the more she believed she was winning. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, and her very presence shifted the narrative. A black woman in a chamber that for generations excluded voices like hers, she carried not only her own name, but the weight of representation. Each calm breath, each steady gaze was more than personal. It was cultural. It was dignity standing against insult, grace holding the line against chaos. And in that moment, the stakes expanded far beyond the walls of the hearing. This wasn't just Greene versus Crockett. It was the story of establishment rage trying to silence new power. It was the clash between a politics addicted to noise and a new vision, grounded in composure, intellect, and lived experience. For millions of women of color, for immigrants, for those who had been told they didn't belong in these halls of power, Crockett's calm became more than silence. It became defiance. The tension stretched as viewers leaned closer to their screens, wondering, how long could Crockett hold her silence? When would she answer back? And when she did, what would happen? It wasn't just suspense, it was inevitability. Greene's shouting had set the stage, but the true drama was still to come, because Jasmine Crockett was not rattled. Beneath her steady exterior, she was preparing, sharpening her words like a blade she would reveal only when the time was right. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need theatrics. She understood what so many before her had learned in their own battles against condescension and fury. That timing was everything. One well-placed line could cut deeper than 1,000 screams, and so, the room leaned into the silence between Greene's shouts and Crockett's calm. Every second built suspense. Every glare, every pause magnified the weight of what hadn't yet been said. The country wasn't just watching politics. They were watching a trial of identities, of values, of visions for America's future. The irony was sharp. Greene believed she owned the stage through noise, but with each passing second it became clearer that Crockett was the one commanding attention. Not through volume, but through poise. Not through rage, but through readiness. And then, just as the moment threatened to explode, came the pivot. A sense in the room that something was about to break. A silence stretched too long. A gaze held too steady. What came next would not only silence Greene, but electrify millions across the nation. To understand the eruption in that chamber, one has to understand Marjorie Taylor Greene herself, a politician whose career has been forged not in quiet policymaking or diligent public service, but in the relentless pursuit of spectacle. From the very beginning, Greene's rise was drenched in controversy. Conspiracy theories weren't just something she entertained in private, they were her ticket into the spotlight. Claims that shocked the mainstream, pronouncements that broke with reality, sound bites designed to stir outrage. These weren't accidents, they were strategies. And for years they worked. She discovered quickly that in America's fractured media landscape, volume mattered more than substance. The louder the outburst, the faster the clip spread. Headlines didn't ask if she was correct. They reported that she yelled. Commentators didn't debate her policy depth. They played the viral footage of her clashes again and again. Greene became a master of this formula. Chaos equals attention. Attention equals relevance. Relevance equals power. It wasn't unusual to see her storming out of hearings, wagging a finger at colleagues or reducing nuanced debates into a shouting match. And each time she carried the certainty that this was her brand. She would be the disruptor, the one who refused decorum, the politician who weaponized volume against a process built on rules. In a Congress that often rewarded outrage with airtime, Greene doubled down. Yet there was always a contradiction simmering beneath the surface. For all her theatrics, what did Greene truly offer? Beyond the headlines and the noise, her record was startlingly thin. The policy proposals rarely gained traction. The grandstanding rarely translated into results. For every clip of her berating an opponent, there was a quieter reality. Committees where her voice carried little influence, colleagues who grew weary of her antics, a growing reputation for bluster over substance. Still, she thrived on the performance. To her supporters, she was a warrior against the establishment, unafraid to say the unsayable. To her critics, she was a caricature of modern politics, proof of how far outrage could carry someone in an era where shouting often drowned out substance. But either way, she understood one thing clearly. If people were talking about her, whether with admiration or disgust, she was winning. And so Greene leaned harder into the role. She perfected the posture of rage, the raised voice, the sneer of dismissal when confronted with facts. For her, every hearing was an arena, every opponent a prop in her endless drama. Even silence became an opportunity. If someone refused to match her fury, she would simply turn up the volume, confident that decibels alone could overpower dignity. But there was a limit, though Greene never admitted it. There was a point at which shouting ceased to command attention and instead exposed desperation. Beneath the noise, cracks were forming. The louder she became, the more transparent it was that the rage was hollow. The insults grew repetitive. The performance wore thin. Viewers could sense when volume replaced argument, when the anger was less about conviction and more about a need to dominate. It was in this space, this widening gap between noise and meaning, that Greene met her greatest vulnerability. Because when you rely on chaos as your currency, composure becomes your enemy. When your entire persona is built on disruption, someone who refuses to be disrupted exposes you. And in Jasmine Crockett, Greene was about to collide with precisely that wall. For all her practice in shouting matches, Greene had not faced someone like Crockett, someone who didn't just dismiss the fury, but turned it back on her without lifting her voice. This was the paradox Greene couldn't solve. Her strength became her weakness. The louder she got, the smaller she seemed against Crockett's calm. It is easy to believe that rage is unstoppable, that chaos always finds a way to dominate. Greene had built her career on that belief, sprinting from one outburst to the next, convinced that her volume would always give her the last word. But in that hearing room on that day, something shifted. Her familiar weapons, conspiracy, insult, raw noise, were blunted before they even landed. The chamber wasn't gasping at her power. It was holding its breath, waiting for the response she couldn't drown out. And so the contradictions that had always lingered in Greene's shadow came into sharp relief. A politician who claimed strength revealed fragility. A figure who built her brand on dominance exposed desperation. For years, the formula had worked. But formulas only work until someone rewrites the script. And yet, beneath the noise, Greene was about to meet a wall she could not break. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's calm cut through the storm, you have to step back, far from the flashing cameras, far from the charged air of that hearing room, and see the road that brought her here. Hers was not a journey built on spectacle. It was carved through persistence, grit, and a belief that the fight for dignity matters most when the odds seem insurmountable. Crockett's story begins in the law. Not the high-drama law of TV screens, but the painstaking, thankless kind, standing beside people who had little else but a public defender to shield them. In dimly lit offices and crowded courthouses, she learned the weight of voices too often ignored. Working-class mothers battling eviction, young men caught in cycles of poverty and policing, immigrants who feared that one misstep might shatter their dreams of belonging. She listened, she argued, she stood. That foundation mattered because it wasn't theory. It was humanity. Each case forced her to measure her resolve, to sharpen her instincts, to refuse the easy path of cynicism. But Crockett's rise wasn't only professional, it was personal. As a black woman in politics, she knew the landscape was rarely welcoming. The halls of power were designed for others with rules unspoken but deeply felt. Know your place, lower your voice, temper your fire. Every room she entered came with a quiet dare. Prove yourself twice over or be dismissed outright. For many, that pressure cracks the spirit. For Crockett, it forged a new kind of steel. She carried into politics the lessons of her own life and her community's struggles. She understood what it meant to stand at the intersection of identity and expectation, to be judged by appearance before words, to be underestimated before a sentence was spoken. Where others might shrink, she chose persistence. And that persistence became her armor. Every slight only deepened her sense of purpose. Every barrier only reminded her that breaking through mattered not just for her, but for those who would come after. Immigrant families, working-class neighborhoods, young women watching from the sidelines, all saw something of themselves in Crockett. She wasn't insulated by privilege nor powered by spectacle. She was powered by something quieter but far more enduring, a refusal to let dignity be stripped away. She understood the temptation of cynicism in a political world addicted to outrage, but she also knew that silence in the face of insult was never an option. Not silence of words, but silence of surrender. Her battles were not without cost. The long nights studying case files, the exhaustion of campaigns where resources were scarce, the constant questioning of her legitimacy in spaces dominated by louder, often less qualified voices, these carved scars that did not show on the surface but lived in memory. And yet every setback sharpened her resilience. Crockett was not immune to frustration, but she refused to let frustration consume her. She redirected it into preparation, into study, into a kind of discipline that outlasted the noise of opponents. So when she stepped into hearings, she carried more than her voice. She carried the weight of communities who had entrusted her to represent not only their needs but their dignity. She carried the fire of women told to be smaller, of black leaders told to wait their turn, of immigrant families told to blend in quietly. She was not there to entertain. She was there to embody persistence itself. Her legal training gave her precision. Her lived experience gave her depth. Together, they created a presence that was unmistakable even when she didn't raise her voice. Crockett had mastered the rare art of commanding attention without demanding it. She didn't need to shout because when she spoke, every word carried the force of 1,000 lived stories behind it. And this is where her strength shone brightest, in her ability to stay grounded when others tried to pull her into chaos. She had already faced storms larger than a single congressional outburst. She had faced the skepticism of gatekeepers, the exhaustion of uphill battles, the weight of being first or being only. Compared to those trials, Greene's theatrics were just another test, a test Crockett had been preparing for her entire life. That was the paradox her opponents never saw. They mistook her composure for passivity, her calm for weakness. They thought volume could rattle her. But they didn't understand that she had spent years standing steady in rooms where the odds were stacked against her. Every sneer, every dismissal, every moment someone tried to cut her down, these had already written her training manual. And that manual had only one conclusion: you never let the storm decide your strength. For Crockett, this wasn't just another political clash. It was something larger, something deeply personal yet universally resonant. It was about the right to stand tall without apology. It was about showing that dignity is not a luxury, it is a shield, a weapon, a legacy. In a political climate addicted to rage, she offered something more radical: restraint sharpened into power. The room didn't know it yet, but Crockett's presence that day was more than reaction, it was revelation. The cameras that had come to capture Greene's latest explosion were about to capture something unexpected: the stillness that exposes bluster, the calm that makes chaos collapse in on itself. And as Crockett sat listening, waiting, she was not just defending herself. She was embodying everyone who had ever been underestimated, shouted down, or told they didn't belong. Because for Jasmine Crockett, every chapter of her story had been training for this exact moment. The moment Greene seized the microphone, the air thickened with a tension that only grew heavier with each word she hurled. What began as sharp barbs quickly escalated into a full-blown tirade, her voice cutting through the chamber like a saw blade. She accused, she mocked, she shouted, not to persuade but to dominate. Greene's volume rose with each sentence, her tone dripping with disdain, her finger jabbing at the air as though sheer force could substitute for substance. "This is the problem with you," she barked, her voice cracking into shrill insistence. "You don't belong here, you don't even understand what America stands for." The words landed like sparks in dry grass, designed to ignite outrage, to frame herself as the defender of some imagined purity under attack. Cameras zoomed closer. Staffers shifted in their seats. The audience in the gallery leaned forward, caught between discomfort and anticipation. Some averted their eyes. Others couldn't look away. Every insult Greene spat seemed meant not just for Crockett, but for anyone who had ever dared challenge the gatekeepers of power. And yet, in that storm of fury, Jasmine Crockett remained still. Her posture straight, her gaze unwavering, her hands folded neatly on the desk before her. She did not flinch, did not roll her eyes, did not even smirk. The silence radiating from her seat became its own kind of force, more powerful than Greene's words, more commanding than her volume. Crockett understood something Greene never had. Sometimes stillness is the loudest rebuttal. The contrast was striking. On one side of the table, chaos incarnate, a congresswoman who thrived on spectacle, shouting to fill the void where reason should have been. On the other side, calm personified, Crockett letting the weight of silence magnify Greene's unraveling. Each second Crockett held her composure was a mirror reflecting back the emptiness of Greene's rage. The hearing room grew uneasy. A cough from the back echoed louder than expected. One aide dropped a pen, the small clatter breaking the suffocating air for a brief instant. Online, the livestream chat lit up with commentary. "She's losing it," typed one viewer. "Crockett isn't even moving, iconic," wrote another. Hashtags began to form in real time, scrolling across the feed as people clipped Greene's outbursts and paired them with Crockett's stoic stillness. Greene, sensing her grip on the room slipping, only grew louder. "This is why our country's falling apart," she screamed, her voice now ragged, the words tumbling over each other in their rush to wound. "Because people like you think you can come here, disrespect our traditions, and pretend you belong." Her hand slammed against the table for emphasis, the sound ricocheting like a gunshot across the chamber. Still, Crockett remained motionless. She was not unmoved. Inside, she felt the sting of every insult, the weight of history behind Greene's words. But she knew better than to let anger steer her. This was not the moment to spar on Greene's terms. This was the moment to let restraint build anticipation, to let the nation see who was unshaken when the storm reached its peak. Even Greene's allies began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their faces betraying a silent calculation. Was this fury still working, or was it tipping into self-destruction? Cameras caught it all. The beads of sweat on Greene's temple, the tightening of jaws, the darting eyes of staffers who wished the floor would open beneath them. Meanwhile, Crockett's calm became a performance of its own. Her silence wasn't absence. It was presence amplified. Every second she refused to rise to Greene's bait told the audience at home, this is what dignity looks like when it's under fire. It was a performance without theatrics, a power that didn't need a raised voice to command the room. Social media amplified the contrast. Clips of Greene's shouting were immediately paired with memes of Crockett's quiet stare, captions like chaos versus composure, and volume victory flooding timelines. The world was watching not just a debate but a morality play unfolding live. Rage against resolve, insult against dignity. The tension reached a breaking point. Greene's words, once sharp, had become almost incoherent under the weight of her own fury. The more she shouted, the less she seemed in control. Crockett's silence, meanwhile, had transformed from passive patience into something dangerous for her opponent. A stage being set, a moment being prepared, because Crockett wasn't about to simply endure. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was the prelude. The air in the room was charged, every ear straining for the moment when she would finally speak. And when she did, it wouldn't just answer Greene. It would turn the entire room upside down. For what felt like an eternity, the room had been consumed by Greene's voice, shrill, relentless, untethered. But when she finally paused, her breath ragged, her face flushed from the force of her own fury, an extraordinary silence took hold, the kind of silence that feels alive, vibrating, pressing down on every chest in the chamber. And then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her voice, when it came, was not raised. It didn't need to be. Smooth, measured, deliberate, her tone was the antithesis of everything Greene had just unleashed. She didn't speak to match Greene's chaos. She spoke to dismantle it. "Congresswoman," she began, her eyes steady, her hands still folded neatly on the desk. "You can yell my name, you can throw your accusations, you can even try to erase my place here. But the truth is, you don't get to decide who belongs in America's story." The chamber shifted. Staffers froze mid-scribble, cameras zoomed in tighter, and Greene's smirk faltered. Crockett had not even raised her volume, but the weight of her words filled every corner of the room. She continued, calm as ever, her voice deliberate, as if each sentence was crafted to pierce through the noise. "You accuse me of not understanding this country. Let me remind you, this country was built by people who were told they didn't belong. By immigrants, by laborers, by women silenced in rooms just like this one. You want to talk about disrespecting tradition? The greatest tradition of America is that those who were once excluded rise to take their rightful seat at the table." A murmur rippled through the audience in the gallery. The contrast was staggering. Greene had screamed herself hoarse, and yet here was Crockett, steady, surgical, cutting deeper with every syllable. Greene tried to interject, opening her mouth with an exasperated huff, but Crockett did not allow the disruption to seize the stage. She paused just long enough for the cameras to catch Greene's fluster, then continued with a calmness that doubled as dominance. "You say people like me are tearing this nation apart. No, Congresswoman. What tears this nation apart is when leaders mistake volume for vision, when they weaponize chaos instead of offering solutions. I was elected to serve. You were elected too, but service requires more than shouting. It requires substance." The words hung heavy, and one could almost hear the air leave Greene's lungs. For the first time that day, she seemed smaller, diminished by the clarity standing across from her. And then came the line that would replay across millions of screens within hours. Crockett leaned back slightly, her voice dipping even lower, commanding the space without force. "You can scream at me all you want, but remember this, you're loud because you're losing, and I'm calm because I know I've already won." The chamber erupted, not in noise but in stunned silence. That single sentence landed like a gavel strike, reverberating through the marble walls, etched instantly into the political lexicon of the moment. Greene froze, blinking rapidly as though searching for a retort. But nothing came. Even the cameras lingered longer than usual, capturing every angle. Greene's faltering composure, Crockett's poised restraint, the spectators' wide-eyed disbelief. In that silence, the power dynamic had inverted. Greene was no longer the aggressor, she was exposed. Crockett wasn't defending herself. She was owning the entire narrative. The reaction outside the chamber was immediate. On social media, the clip spread like wildfire. "You're loud because you're losing," trended within minutes, plastered across timelines as users spliced Crockett's calm delivery against Greene's red-faced shouting. Memes sprouted instantly, side-by-side images labeled noise versus power, or captions like Crockett 1, Greene 0. Hashtags multiplied, each one amplifying the moment. Mic drop. "Calm wins dire, Crockett clapback inside the room." Greene attempted a half-hearted laugh, the kind used to mask discomfort. But the laughter didn't reach her eyes. She shifted in her seat, tapping a pen against the desk, her body restless, betrayed by nerves. Crockett, meanwhile, simply adjusted her papers as though she had delivered nothing more than routine remarks. That was part of the brilliance. She didn't bask in the moment. She let the audience do it for her. The hearing chair cleared their throat, awkwardly attempting to restore order, but the balance of power had already shifted. Crockett's composure had not only neutralized Greene's tirade, it had transformed it into a showcase of the very contrast America was hungry to see. Chaos had tried to dominate. Dignity had triumphed. Greene tried once more to regain footing, muttering something about protecting American values, but it was too late. Every attempt at recovery sounded hollow against the echo of Crockett's mic drop line. The cameras weren't focused on Greene anymore. They lingered on Crockett, her calm smile now symbolic, her silence heavier than any of Greene's words could ever be. Audience members in the gallery whispered to one another, their eyes fixed on Crockett like she had just unveiled a piece of history in real time. One reporter furiously typed, the headline already forming, "Crockett's calm destroys Greene's fury." It was not just what Crockett had said, it was how she had said it. She hadn't matched rage with rage, hadn't given Greene the chaotic spectacle she craved. Instead, she had offered something far more devastating, composure as a weapon, dignity as a shield, and truth as a blade. Every chapter of Crockett's journey had led to this exact exchange. The discipline of a lawyer, the patience of a community advocate, the resilience of someone who had faced disrespect before and refused to shrink, all of it converged into that moment, where calmness became courage and courage became victory. And Greene knew it. Her eyes darted, her jaw tightened, her voice no longer carrying the same edge. She had been exposed, not by Crockett's aggression, but by her restraint. As the cameras pulled back to capture the chamber once more, the scene told a story without words. Crockett seated in unshakable stillness, Greene rattled and restless, the audience caught in the aftershock of the exchange. And as the echo of her words spread, the real storm began, not inside the chamber but across the nation. The moment Jasmine Crockett uttered those calm, devastating words, "You're loud because you're losing, and I'm calm because I know I've already won," the hearing chamber wasn't the only place that fell silent. Within seconds, phones lit up, live-stream comments exploded, and across America people leaned forward in disbelief. By the time the clip hit Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, it was unstoppable. The hashtags appeared first, like sparks catching dry grass. Risa calm winds shot to the top of trending lists within the hour. Crockett Clapback followed close behind, fueled by meme accounts stitching Crockett's poised delivery next to Greene's red-faced shouting. Then came the Rasher mic drop, used so many times in a single evening that it became more than a tag. It became a cultural shorthand. Twitter feeds transformed into a stream of admiration and astonishment. Progressive voices amplified her composure as the antidote to chaos. One viral post read, "Jasmine Crockett didn't just shut down Greene, she redefined what power looks like in politics. Calm is the new strength." Another quipped, "Greene brought the thunder, but Crockett brought the lightning strike." Thousands of retweets carried these sentiments into every corner of the digital sphere. On TikTok, edits layered Crockett's mic drop over dramatic soundtracks from violins to hip-hop beats. Young creators remixed the moment into skits, celebrating her restraint while mocking Greene's meltdown. Even apolitical accounts joined in, turning the clash into a universal metaphor for keeping your cool when chaos tries to pull you down. And then came the memes. Screenshots of Greene mid-yell were captioned with phrases like, "When the Wi-Fi goes out," or "Me arguing with my microwave at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Crockett's serene expression became a reaction image in its own right, used to symbolize dignity, patience, or the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth is on your side. The internet had crowned its victor, and the contrast was too striking to ignore. What made the shockwaves even more remarkable was how far beyond the progressive base they reached. Commentators who often avoided partisan praise acknowledged the difference in composure. A centrist columnist wrote, "One may not agree with Crockett on every policy, but her ability to remain unshaken in the face of blatant provocation was a masterclass in statesmanship." Even critics of Crockett's politics conceded the moment was powerful. Conservative talk shows debated whether Greene had gone too far, with one host reluctantly admitting, "Look, I don't like her positions, but Crockett handled herself better than most in that chamber." Greene gave her the spotlight and she owned it. That reluctant respect only added to the sense that this was more than a partisan skirmish. Headlines the next morning told the story in bold print. "Crockett's calm destroys Greene's fury," one outlet declared. Another simply called it the Crockett moment, a turning point in political theater. Commentators compared it to other iconic exchanges that transcended the room in which they happened, the kind of moment replayed in classrooms and documentaries years later. Cable networks looped the clip repeatedly, each commentator dissecting the silence, the delivery, the seismic effect of restraint. Pundits argued over whether it was premeditated or instinctive, but all agreed on one thing. Greene's fury had unintentionally paved the way for Crockett's triumph. Outside the media bubble, everyday people felt something deeper stir. Immigrant families shared the video in group chats, proud to see someone stand so tall in the face of disrespect. Young women of color posted reaction videos with tears in their eyes, saying things like, "This is what it feels like to be seen," to be heard without even shouting. For many, Crockett's calm wasn't just a tactic, it was a mirror of their lived experience. How many times had they been told to stay quiet, to endure insults, to let others define them? And yet here was a woman who showed that composure could be power, that silence could be louder than rage. Meanwhile, Greene's camp scrambled. Her staff attempted damage control, issuing statements about passionate debate and defending American values. But it was too late. The narrative had already crystallized. She was the chaos. Crockett was the calm. And America had chosen who looked stronger. In coffee shops, offices, and classrooms, conversations replayed the moment like it was the finale of a hit TV series. People weren't just talking about what Crockett said, they were talking about how it made them feel, empowered, validated, inspired. And yet, the viral blaze was only the surface. Because beneath the hashtags, beyond the headlines, something deeper was happening, something bigger than politics. In the end, what unfolded in that chamber was never just an argument between two lawmakers. It became a parable of our times, a test of what kind of leadership America is willing to honor. On one side stood the politics of chaos, a figure who believed that volume equals authority, that shouting down an opponent is the same as winning. On the other stood Jasmine Crockett, proving that real strength is not measured in decibels but in dignity. Her calm presence reminded the nation of something we too often forget. Power drawn from conviction will always outlast noise born of insecurity. Greene screamed, but it was Crockett's silence that spoke louder. Greene gestured wildly, but it was Crockett's composure that captured the room. That contrast did more than shut down one exchange. It reframed what authority looks like in modern America. Because this clash was not only about two women. It was about two visions of America. One vision thrives on division, feeding chaos to keep people afraid and angry. The other believes in composure, intelligence, and respect, even under fire. Crockett's calm was not weakness. It was a declaration that chaos has no claim to the American spirit. For millions watching, the lesson was clear. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to insult to inspire. You don't have to dominate the room with fury when you can own it with grace. That's a message that transcends politics, reaching into classrooms, workplaces, families, the everyday spaces where dignity is tested. And in a time when public life feels poisoned by outrage and noise, Crockett's response offered something revolutionary, proof that grace under fire still wins. It reminded viewers that leadership is not about silencing others, but about standing so firmly in your truth that no storm can shake you. Her poise became more than a strategy. It became a symbol. A symbol for immigrants told to stay quiet. A symbol for young people told they're too inexperienced. A symbol for women of color told their voice doesn't belong at the table. Crockett didn't just answer Greene. She answered all of those doubts with one living, breathing example of resilience. And maybe that's why the moment resonated so deeply. Because while the headlines focused on the clash, everyday Americans saw something bigger. They saw a reflection of their own struggles. The boss who belittles, the teacher who underestimates, the stranger who stereotypes. They saw in Crockett's calm the possibility that one can endure all of that and still rise higher, still win. This wasn't just about Crockett shutting down Greene. It was about affirming a truth many have been desperate to hear. Composure is not passive, it is powerful. Intelligence is not elitism, it is strength. Respect is not weakness, it is the foundation of real leadership. And so the chamber became more than a battleground. It became a mirror held up to America asking, which side are we on? Do we want to be a nation of noise where rage defines our politics? Or do we still believe in dignity and restraint in the quiet authority of truth? For Crockett, the answer was never in doubt. Every chapter of her story had prepared her to meet this moment without flinching. And in doing so, she gave America a glimpse of what leadership rooted in grace can look like. As the echoes of Greene's shouting faded, it was Crockett's words and her calm that remained. And that is the ultimate victory, not just silencing an opponent, but leaving behind a lesson that endures long after the shouting stops. But even as the chamber settled, another question lingered in the air. Because if one moment of calm could shake the nation, what would happen when the entire country decided to embrace it? Section 9. Outro and Call to Action. 300 words. Marjorie Taylor Greene may have come into that chamber determined to dominate with volume, but by the end it was Jasmine Crockett's calm that silenced the room. The video title says it all, Greene yelled. But Crockett's clapback shut her down so completely that the silence that followed was louder than any scream. This was more than a political exchange. It was a defining moment, a line in history drawn between chaos and composure. Because in the end, dignity doesn't just win arguments, it defines history. Crockett showed us that composure under fire can pierce through noise, that conviction can stand taller than insults, and that truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. Her response wasn't just about silencing Greene. It was about affirming for every viewer that respect and strength are not opposites. They are allies, and that's where you come in. If you believe that moments like this matter, if you believe that dignity deserves the spotlight, that truth should drown out chaos, then join us. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to see the power of composure in action. Leave a comment and add your voice to this conversation, because your perspective is part of the movement too. This clash will be remembered, not because of the yelling, but because of the grace that answered it. Crockett's moment is more than a viral clip. It's part of a bigger wave of change sweeping across America. A wave where arrogance is exposed, where noise is outshined by truth, and where leaders who embody dignity rise above the fray. And tonight, as the echoes of that chamber fade, one truth remains clear. History will not remember the scream. It will remember the calm that conquered it.